Everyone, it's LS, and this is going to be the patch 8.10 notes rundown, and let's just get right into it, because I'm expecting big things for this patch, but I don't know if it's going to end up showing itself. So let's see. Scion, base health regen decreased, E-base damage decreased. So let's see what they did. Base health regen 10 per 5 to 9 per 5. So Scion ends up losing an auto attack before his first recall, because he loses 12 HP a minute. Roar of the Slayer, base damage is down from 70 to 210 scaling to 65 to 205, so that's virtually negligible. Ability power, for the people in bronze, so that's completely negligible. Secondary target damage 130% to 100% to target struck by a knocked back enemy. Armor reduction 20% to primary target to 20% to all targets hit by Roar of the Slayer or a knocked back enemy. Armor reduction duration 2.5 to 4 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and say that this is a buff for a Scion Z. Because in mid-game and late-game teamfights, I feel like this being able to help out his team that much more is going to be more valuable than the minuscule loss of damage on the base. And then obviously the armor reduction duration being increased is even more fantastic for Scion, so I don't see how anyone could perceive this as a nerf. This is actually, I think, a really big buff for Scion. Our Unstoppable Onslaught, Scion's ultimate is no longer obstructed by an allied Azir's Emperor's Divide. Well, that's kind of strange because, well, never mind. Dr. Mundo, our cost and cooldown increase. Sadism, 100 to 70 second scaling to 110 to 90 second scaling. 20% current health to 25% current health. So this is a placebo nerf. Mundo is not a champion that you cast his ultimate or you look to cast his ultimate and make plays off cooldown. So the 10 seconds being added is completely negligible. At max rank, this is probably the only spot where you will feel it, and even then you're only going to feel it in very, very specific instances where before there used to be some Baron dances or maybe late game sieges where you could realistically assume that you might be able to get to cast his ultimate twice if you were at max CDR. This obviously does put a little bit of a damper on it, but this right here, 20% to 25% current health, is completely irrelevant. So this is a placebo nerf to probably satisfy some of the people that are saying that Mundo's overpowered or is broken. He's definitely not. I still think that he actually needs more buffs if you want to see him become a mainstream menace inside of the current meta. Poppy, movement speed increased. Poppy's changes last patch were intended to be approximately power neutral, but they ended up taking her down slightly. Who could have guessed? Base movement speed, 340 to 345. That's exactly what she needs to get some of her power back. She needs that 5 MS to bring her right back from being a B-tier top laner to still struggling to scratch A-tier. And let's not even forget that S-tier exists, so we got that going for us. Zac, W ability power ratio removed, E and R ability power ratio increased. All right, so this is a North American buff. Unstable Matter loses the ability power ratio. E Elastic Slingshot gets 0.2 ability power, 0.2 ability power here, so he gets 0.4 total ability power if he manages to hit all of his skill shot, or not skill shot, but his E and his R. Ultimately doesn't matter. This is only going to affect a small sample size of Zac players that don't understand how to properly play the game in the first place, so we got that going for us. Bard, it also affects people that are playing it in a fun way, but I don't think that there's any way to deny that obviously just going the full tankier route and just basically being a CC bot for your team and letting your teammates carry you through and just peeling for the primary carries is just going to be infinitely better than dealing a little bit more damage, because it's already extremely awkward to deal AP damage on Zac, and having a 0.4 ability power total added to your E and your R is not going to dramatically influence AP Zac's changes or his win rate or something. Bard, W mana cost decreased. W Caretaker Shrine, 90 mana to 70 mana. So obviously if he casts this, 5 times inside of a lane, that is quite big. 20 mana per cast is quite nice. Do I think this is magically going to make Bard come back into the meta? Absolutely not. Bard has other problems going on currently inside of the support item, the support meta down in bottom lane. I do think that he's also a champion that requires a lot of practice and being extremely, extremely skilled at him in order to make him work. So unless other changes end up occurring that do not necessarily pertain to the champion itself, but rather the meta across the map, but also itemization, I don't foresee Bard magically coming back unless it's going to be a player comfort pick that maybe a team isn't prepared for. Kindred, small quality of life buff. Mark of the Kindred. An ally kills a hunted jungle monster within 6 seconds of Kindred damaging it. Athene will still acquire the passive stack. Item, Runic Echoes. Now builds out of Lost Chapter instead of Aether Wisp. Movement speed removed, cooldown reduction, and mana added. Total cost unchanged. Build path, Aether Wisp, Stalker's Blade, Lost Chapter, 325 gold. Movement speed 7%, mana 3. So this is a really weird change, and I don't know who would have ever said that this is good. Let's do a rundown of all of the mage junglers and think about who would rather have 300 mana and 10% cooldown reduction versus 7S, because when you're giving randomly AP junglers 300 mana, what you're trying to say is that the competitive professional junglers didn't know how to already manage their mana base, or the high MMR junglers, which of course they already did because they never really had mana issues in the first place. So the 300 mana is a placebo. It doesn't actually do anything for good players. It doesn't help them inside of the game. Maybe 1 in 10 times they'll actually get an extra spell cast off inside of a gank that maybe they wouldn't have gotten before. The cooldown reduction being added to 10%, well, how much is that actually going to affect Elise? Elise would rather have the 7% MS than the 10% cooldown reduction. Evelyn would rather have the 7% MS than the 10% cooldown reduction. Gragas would likely have the 7% MS than the 10% cooldown reduction. What other AP junglers? Oh, yes, that's right. Shyvana, excellent. Shyvana would rather have the 7% MS than the 10% cooldown reduction, especially because she's not even going to get any benefit from mana. So then we're looking at what other junglers? I can't even think of other AP junglers off the top of my head that would actually benefit from this. I mean, Echo, who usually he's going to be off tank, he would rather have 7% MS than he would have 300 mana and 10% cooldown reduction. Nidalee would rather have 7% MS than 300 mana and 10% cooldown reduction. So who is actually benefiting from the loss of MS? Because when you're in the jungle, the movement speed is obviously going to affect champions differently, depending on what their MS is. But for the most part, the junglers want to be able to move around the map faster. They want to clear the camps faster. They want to have higher speed when approaching a gank or running away from something. They don't care about having an extra 10% cooldown reduction. That's just laughable. It's not going to impact a 1v1 in almost any cases for most of the champions that I just named. The mana is not going to impact actually, the mana could impact a 1v1 very early on, but outside of that, it won't do anything. You would rather just have the MS. So I don't know who was sitting where and who they talked to that said, oh yeah, this is a really good idea to remove one of the core defining traits of this jungle item, giving the MS, but it makes absolutely no sense. I mean, you even look at some of the lower tier junglers, right? Like a Mumu that he has the option of building Runic Echoes or Cinderhulk. Well, now he's always just building Cinderhulk. It doesn't make any sense for him to build Runic Echoes anymore. He's not getting any incentive to go into this tree. He doesn't need the mana. He doesn't need the cooldown reduction because Mumu can already hit 40% elsewhere. When you look at a champion like Gragas, someone that historically at some points was able to go Runic Echoes, he's not going to go Runic Echoes anymore. He's not getting any of the MS. He doesn't care about the CDR. He's going to get it elsewhere. He doesn't need the mana because if you were good enough at Gragas in the first place, or if you actually understood how to play jungle, then you didn't need the excess 300 mana. So anyways, really poor change, I think. I think this is absolutely horrible. This is just, I think this is a nerf to this entire jungle item and all the mages that would end up playing it, but that's just me. Warding Totem. Wards last longer but have a higher cooldown, 60 to 120 seconds to 90 to 120 seconds. So I'm assuming that this is done because I've heard rumors, or not rumors, but obviously, I don't check patches until they go live, but I've heard that you need 4 jungle camps now in order to gank, so I'm assuming that this added duration is to fade the initial gank. So 90 to 180 seconds is now the change, and then 240 to 120 seconds. So what this ends up doing is the level 5 and level 6 gank potentially has more power, but at that point you should assume that the laner would have recalled by then and has a control ward, thus making it difficult in and of itself. So I feel like this is targeted at hitting some of the slower clear junglers, and I'm going to probably talk about that later if indeed the jungle changes did go through. Support and jungle item exclusivity. Jungle items and gold items are both tuned to give unique lower cost power to their roles. You can no longer have both a jungle item and a support item. Well, that's fine. Runes, Balance Pass, so I'm really excited. Cheap shot damage, increased Ingenious Hunter item cooldown reduction, more front-weighted toward initial value, 12 to 30 scaling to 15 to 60. That's really, really big. So some lane bullies are really going to make use of this, because this is quite a lot of damage that can just be completely front-loaded into their laning phase. And I feel like this is quite powerful. At late game, getting an extra 30 damage every couple of seconds added into your team fight can end up amounting to a couple hundred of damage over the entire duration. So I think this is obviously a really, really good buff for people that they didn't want to take the other two options in that tree. I believe that it was, sudden impact and the heal thing. I forget what the name of it is, but yeah. Ingenious Hunter, 10% to 15%. Well, that's not actually going to do anything. So this is a placebo buff because this item is, or this rune is not really the best rune when you compare it to the other two that are in the tree. The MS, I think, is infinitely more valuable than the base item active reduction, in most cases in a solo queue setting. In competitive, it's a little bit different with Ingenious Hunter, depending on what champion you are and what items you're getting. But then obviously there's the HP healing one, which when you synergize it with the other rune that's inside of the tree, you end up getting a lot of HP back, and obviously that can be very important for sustain. So let's go into sorcery now. Phase Rush, 15% to 40% scaling to 25% to 40% scaling. So really, really like this buff. I do always like champions that are using the Phase Rush Mastery to get a little bit more love. 10% being added is quite big because that basically means that it's converting into a tier 1 boots being added just at rank 1, and I think that's really, really fantastic. So credit to Riot here for this change, because I think this is actually the best change that we've had throughout the entire patch so far. Resolve, Demolish base damage increased, Chrysalis health decreased, bone plating damage reduction decreased, 125 to 175, so it's basically adding an auto attack, which in the, the big picture, that's not meaning too much. I mean, it's a nice little buff. I don't necessarily think, though, that it means that Magically Demolish is going to be the go-to rune inside of that tree, and it's also not going to be something that you're speccing into in order to gain access to. Chrysalis 60 HP to 50 HP doesn't really matter. I mean, it does, but it doesn't. Bone plating, 20 to 50 scaling to 15 to 40 scaling. This is something that you can feel, but again, bone plating is something you do play around. And it is something that you will eventually feel throughout multiple cooldowns as it builds up to amount to the equivalency of an auto attack. Stopwatch available. Alright, they just can't leave us alone. Hextech Flash Traption in combat lockout duration decreased. Time available 10 minutes to 8 minutes. I mean, I don't know. I feel like 10 minutes is a really, really good spot. 8 minutes, it's still at a point where you're looking at it and thinking to yourself, okay, it is still kind of far out. Maybe I don't want to get it. But when you consider the other options inside of the tree, it does start to make you, it does pull on you a little bit. And you're like, maybe I actually do want that stopwatch at 8 minutes. So this isn't quite as broken as stopwatch was originally. But I don't like how they're dialing it back to go to that point. I don't think that stopwatch was something that was super exciting for a lot of people to play against, or even watch for that matter, because of what it incentivizes. Hextech Flash Traption, this is really, really big though. 10 seconds to 2 seconds means that you can be in combat, be running away, and then potentially flash over a wall. And I think that's really, really cool. So I really like the Hextech Flash Traption change here. I can definitely see a lot of creativity coming from this. It also, I think, makes running away from people that have Hextech Flash Traption that much harder if you go over a wall and then they're out of combat and they can chase you, as long as they have an MS or something to bolster their MS and eventually catch up to you. So I think that's quite good. So for the runes, Inspiration Tree, one good thing, one bad thing. Resolve, fine. Sorcery is the best change. Domination, obviously really good here, but this I don't think is that big. Jungle, camp experience. Jungle monsters give less experience, but experience scales with level. Slowdown experience no longer reduced by 5% per level. Champion is ahead of the camp being taken. This is actually really good for junglers that already utilized rubber banding, and they feel really torn by having to go clear a camp like Krugs or like Gromp that they have neglected the entire game because they've prioritized taking wolves and wraiths over and over and over. So that's nice. Monster Camp experience now scales with level capping at 7. Blue Sentinel 180 to 115 to 180 at levels 1 through 7. Okay, so all of these XPs are changed. Gromp no longer grants 37.5 reduced experience on its first clear, so now you can get level 2 off Gromp, I guess, right away. False Start, Medium Krugs, Small Krugs, and Large Razor Beak no longer grant 25% reduced experience on their first clear. Large Krug, first experience reduction 50% to 30%. So, what this means now is that you need 4 camps in order to get level 4. And depending on what color you end up starting, this can actually dramatically affect how you root. And it can also dramatically affect what your bottom lane being and how good of a leash you get, and what that can end up meaning for your mid and top laner, or even your bottom laner if you're starting top side and you're getting a leash from your top laner. So what this does is it nerfs the single target clearers, and it also nerfs slow clear champions, or champions that are already having a little bit of difficulty with sustain in the first place. With that being said, champions like Nidalee, like Graves, get massive buffs from this. Champions like Kayn get massive buffs from this, even though Kayn should only be seen in solo queue. He should not have any place inside a competitive, at least not until he gets a little bit more love. So 4 camps to level 3, and the changes to the wards above. Champions like Nidalee, like Graves, champions like even Xin Zhao is probably going to be actually quite well with this change, and he's already someone that has been popping up for quite a while now. This really alters the junglers that are going to be good. Some people ask me about like Elise and Lee Sin and Kha'Zix and stuff and whatnot. I think Elise is a little bit more well off than a champion like Kha'Zix, just because her utility and usefulness straight out of the jungle at level 4 is more impactful than a Kha'Zix who failed to really secure anything. And then also because of the change to the sustain and whatnot, she benefits a little bit more. So like champions like Rengar, Kha'Zix, they obviously get hurt by this quite a lot. Slow clearers get hurt by this a lot. Another champion that, you know, most people think about and what does this mean for them is like Skarner and obviously Sejuani. Because the game is slowed down, if they can actually just respond to counter match gank the opponent and have proper wards set up, I think that Skarner kind of benefits from this more so than some of the other tank junglers. So overall, I actually don't mind the change that much. Let's see what ends up happening for Rift Scuttler. 2 Rift Scuttlers spawn at the start of the game, but after both die, only one spawns at a time for the remainder of the game. That Rift Scuttler is tankier early and worth significantly more XP. So, okay, that's a lot of XP. Gold reward 70 to 7140. Scuttles spawn at the top and bottom river. Both must be killed before the respawn timer activates. Respawn time 180 to 2 minutes. Okay, 2 minutes and 15 seconds. That's actually quite big. Scuttler's extra defenses now have a particle to indicate when she's protected and when the shield has been broken. So Scuttlecrab has a gender now, or maybe I missed that in previous patches. Rift Scuttler's chance of trying to steal a honey fruit is significantly decreased. Okay, so what this is saying to me is that junglers that can clear really fast the first 4 camps are going to have significantly more power here. Also, early dueling and skirmish junglers like Xin, like Nidalee, like Graves are obviously going to be more well off with trying to contest the Scuttlecrab, getting to it first, being healthier, and basically saying, hey, I can get this without compromising my root. So certain junglers are going to really, really love this change. Other junglers that is, you know, especially a jungler like Shaco, these changes are crippling to a champion like Shaco. Or to junglers that they're significantly slower. Another jungler that will probably really benefit from this is like Ivern. Because now Ivern can get really creative with clears and path immediately into the Scuttlecrab, steal it right away with a smite or something, provide a lot of vision control, and really put a damper on the enemy jungler, also the while being able to retreat back into the own vicinity of his own jungle. And Ivern did get a buff in the last patch, but the problem is that Ivern is a champion that still has problems with the rune page. The rune page predicament and also just itemization. So this is, you know, it's an interesting change. I don't mind these 2 changes. I think that it mixes up what champions are going to be able to be impactful. Obviously, champions that rely on snowballing and accelerating in order to get ahead, especially in a solo queue environment rather than a competitive one, are definitely getting hurt with these changes. But I like that because it requires you to play smarter levels 4 through 7 in order to find more success and more of a reward. And I think that it incentivizes junglers and laners having to play more intelligently with one another and play around each other more, which I know that just sounds like hell on earth, for a lot of junglers, not naming any names, but just being able to power farm camps and then arbitrarily go places and try to get kills should be a style that should not be allowed to exist, and anything that goes against that is going to be quite good. Hunter's Talisman, updated Kindle damage over 5 seconds, no longer amped to 75. If you have bonus health, 150% wall in the jungle, up to 40 mana per 5 seconds, based on missing mana wall in the jungle or river, okay. Hunter's Machete, damage on hit versus monsters 25 to 35. Attacking jungle monsters no longer grants 15% bonus attack speed. So this is a really big change for Graves. It's also a really big change for just the single target on hit junglers that aren't going to be going Talisman, I guess, like... sorry. And then Skirmish the Shaver seems to be getting the same changes. So Graves is someone that is standing out to me with all these changes. These changes all say Graves to me for 80 carry junglers. That is the vibe that I'm getting from all these changes. Stalker's Blade, inheriting the changes to Talisman and Machete, okay. Base mana up to 40 mana per 5 seconds. So I don't mind the jungle changes. I mean, you shouldn't be able to get level 3 ganks off anyway, if laners are playing properly. I do think that this does change what junglers are going to be viable. Obviously, the route that still could exist for traditional junglers is going to be blue, Gromp, Wolves, Red, and then you get level 4. The problem is that the sustain and what that means for certain champions and how much more it means to have a good leash or to have a powerful bottom lane that can maybe accelerate the clear speed of your initial camp take. So this is all really, really important, and it should be kept in mind. Graves, Nidalee, huge buffs by these changes, and that should be kept in mind. Ivern as well. Some of the tank junglers like Skarner, I think, actually greatly welcome these types of changes, and then obviously the ward stuff that happened above does really, really impact and hurt champions like Kha'Zix, or champions even like Lee Sin, I think, get significantly hurt by these types of changes. But anyways, bounties. Kill streak bounties are now granted only to the killer, not the team. Okay, this is really good. 4 kills, 350, 250 gold to killer. Okay, this is actually really good. So this is helping the carry incentive type stuff. Replays. You can now download the replays of other players ranked in Clash games, whether scouting or reviewing replays of yourself. Okay, that's fine. League client bug fixing. Okay. Upcoming skins and chromas. Pulsefire Twisted Fate. Pulsefire that looks like Mortal Kombat Deception Sub-Zero. I don't know. He has his mask off. He looks old. He looks a lot older than I thought. Anyways, Dragon Master Swain. That's great. Pulsefire Riven. That's all fine as well. So this wasn't the big patch that I was expecting. I was expecting a much larger patch, and I was expecting a lot more shakeup to the champions. I mean, the biggest shakeup that will come is inside of the jungle, because obviously the scaling and the tier power is going to dramatically shift. I think that the Scion change is actually really, really good for Scion. The Mundo thing is just to satisfy people that are maybe complaining or crying about him. The Poppy thing is like, what the fuck? Demonetized, by the way. Zac change is like, what? Like, someone's having fun in an ARAM or something, I don't know. Bard, this is really big for Bard, but I don't think that it's enough. Athene entering Summoner's Rift is kind of interesting. Runic Echo thing is the worst change, single-handedly, since a few patches. And I'm talking about Zoe 0.25. I don't know what this is. This is really just poor. I can't imagine that they talk to any competitive junglers about this change. This is just stupid. Warding change, I think, is actually fine, because now people that don't invest into control wards, or they don't actually prioritize warding and understanding the timings at which they ward, they're going to be punished further. So I do like that. The bounty stuff, bounty change on being killed, dying removes 3 bounty levels, dying resets bounty to 0. This is obviously changed as well. I mean, no bounty on 1 and 2 kills is fantastic. And then obviously 3 kills, 200 gold going to the killer is good. So it's pretty much it. So I think that's it for the patch 8.10 notes. I expect a lot of Graves. I expect competent Nidalee players to actually rejoice over some of the jungle changes, because Nidalee is one of the fastest clearers, and she's going to be someone that can definitely utilize controlling the Rift Scuttlers. This is all really good. So that is pretty much it. Yeah.